European society that led to this great feeling of superiority, which I think led to this idea that of the ideas of patriarchy, manifest destiny, and incredible sexism, racism, and so forth, and this hierarchy stuff. So I thought, okay, that's very interesting. I don't, it's hard to separate myself out from having been so influenced by that society, because I think it's possible, you know, as I think about world history and the little bits that I know, that the Han Chinese society thinks of itself as superior in a way that that we can't even comprehend. And some of the Asian societies, when the Westerners first came, like classical Japanese society, thought of the Westerners who first came as barbarians, people who didn't even bathe, who didn't know anything, you know. And so I'm not so sure if his idea that it seems like, as far as destruction to the world and the organic society, that our classical Western society is the most destructive. But I have questions about whether that's true or not. And given today's cultural situation with the hegemony of the United States being challenged by China these days, whether, you know, which is currently the most dangerous form of egotistical racism in a society. So, which is it? Okay, that's my initial blurb.
Cool.
It's my turn now.
You like.
Okay, I'll be very brief. I sympathize with everything that Ken just said. I just don't think that China is challenging the hegemony of the United States. I think it's proposing a different kind of relationship among nations that is not hegemonic. No, there is no hegemony of any country over any others. It's just a different kind of relationship, of cooperation and helping each other among nations. But that's my point of view, and that doesn't have anything to do with the book, which I had a very superficial and brief reading, and I was very confused and I didn't understand much. So that's my case. I also enjoy that part that Sophia mentioned about the bears and the native cultures, you know, having this kind of kinship relationship with the animals. But then I was totally confused, going from, you know, Greeks to Freud to Egypt to you know, I mean, it was too much for my limited brain, and I couldn't connect very much. You know, the natives, then the Greeks, then the Hebrews, then the Egyptians, then the Freud. Everything is put in a basket, and I, as Ken mentioned, it's a very Western-centric view. He doesn't even consider that other parts of the world exist. A little bit of the natives, but other than that, there is no other culture in the world, apparently, for him. So that's my comment. Thank you.
Thank you.
By the way, I hope you're right about China.
Yeah, well, Ken, I read a lot of Chinese news, and I try to understand the world from their perspective, rather from the Western translation of what they are doing. I read directly the Chinese media, and not because I know Chinese. I read the Chinese media that is translated by them into English. And you can go to CGTN, the Chinese global television networks, and you can see the world with their own eyes. And in no way they're challenging, and their actions, you can see their actions. They're not, look at the West portrays China as, trying to enslave Africa in a debt trap. I mean, the Africans don't say that. They don't feel that way. They welcome the cooperation and the help that they're getting from the Chinese into the development. It's not a neo-colonialism. So it's interesting to see the world from their own media and see what they are saying. And there's no ambitions of becoming a hegemonic power. They are contributors to all the international organization, the Paris Climate Accord, the United Nations, this and that and that. They're very international. They're when the United States is going leaving all these international organizations, the Chinese are supporting them. So there's, again, based on what they say and what they do, in my interpretation, there's no ambition to become a hegemonic power. They have a good relationship with everybody. Which country can go, the president of the country can make a trip that Xi Jinping did last year, going first to Saudi Arabia, and then next step is Tehran in Iran. They're saying, okay, we want good relationships with everybody, with the Saudis, with Iran, with everybody. There is no discrimination. Oh, you are my friend, and this is my enemy. This paranoid Western paranoia that we have to be dominant, we have to be on top, we are the best, we are the superior. You don't see that in the Chinese, at least in my view. Anyway, that's all. That's not about the book. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sideline. Okay, Lenore.
I just first have to say I love listening to each one of you. You enrich my life each week. I must say that my grasp of the chapter is much like Mario's. I have read, certain, maybe as much of it, and skimmed the others, and I highlighted so that but my highlighting is in order to try to remember what it's about, because it does go all over the place, and I do have the same difficulties. I like the sections that Ken mentioned very much so. That phrase about the fear, that statement reminded me of, my more simplistic, popular references from a song by Oscar Hammerstein, the lyric, you have to be taught to hate, about fear. And I think that's such an important thing. That does, hearing him mention it again, and reminded me that I was thinking about it last night, listening to a professor who deals with the subject of Islamic, the problems that are going on in the world today, and who defined it as a tremendous rise in hatred all over the world. And I was thinking when I was hearing this was in relation, of course, to the shootings in New Zealand and other acts against other groups of people. And I was thinking, my goodness, we need to set out. They were trying to figure out, these people, how do we deal with this? How do you deal with it? Is it terrorism or is it individual? And it's an uprising in expressions of hatred. And I thought to myself, we, the United States, but also the other countries in the world that are also concerned about this, need to set out a program of education about fear and hatred and the resentments and all this stuff that's one religion against another, group against each other, and whites, fearful of the loss of their place from brown and black people, and so on and so forth. Anyway, that's a connection that has come from this chapter.
Mhm.
But if it could come down to what do we do, I guess my head is constantly, God, how do we solve these problems? And trying to get at the cause or the roots or what had happened in history. And it's very hard. It's sort of like it's very difficult for me to get emotionally caught up in that process that he's doing. I want to get to the point. What do we do about it right now?
Right.
And I guess there are clues throughout, and Mario, your concept, you're suggesting the idea of listening to China's news was very interesting. That we all need to listen to each other a lot more.
Mhm.
All nations, instead of just. Okay, I think that's all I have to say right now.
Yeah, that's great. I one of the things I heard you say, I'm going to phrase it a little bit differently, and so tell me if it still represents, but in terms of that fear of loss, I heard you say that there's, the white world, let's say, often is afraid of losing their status to people of color, right? So it's kind of like loss of privilege. Did I understand that right?
Well,
That's one of the, not just specific to white people from people of color, but that's one of the threads that's in place on the global. Yeah.
I was using that, generally as an example because it is one of the groups, the white nationalists,
Mm-hmm.
whose fear of, and this was, there were many points made in this discussion that the Islamophobia, for example, was stoked by this president when he immediately upon becoming president said Muslims cannot come to this country. That started, that encouraged that. Apparently, those bombings are related to what people are getting on the internet, and that's why it's happening more and more, around the world. But there's, the anti-Semitism and the anti-Black and the anti-this and that. It's all sort of related to various groups. I don't think it's only white. It's the people, white nationalists, are certainly a part of this, a major part of this. Mm-hmm. I don't know if I answered your statement.
Yeah, no, I think I was just wanting to understand, and it seems like there is a theme that people are afraid that they're going to lose their status, their privilege, their access to freedom or goods. Yes, and often it's put on a different group, whether it's a group of color, a group of religion, and so on and so forth, right? Also, the other thing that I'd like to come back to, or just highlight for just a moment, is this question that you bring up about what do we do, and having that impatience. Because, Sophia, did you want to say something?
Oh, well, finish your thought, but I have a way that I'd like to respond to both of your ideas. So,
yeah. So, I think my theory is that what we're doing with this book and why we're grappling with this stuff is because if we don't understand how we got here and what are some of the different components that have contributed to this, the evolution and the development that's brought us globally to this state that we're in, then anything we do is reactive. So yes, Bookchin, does he have a bias? I'm sure he does, because he's part of the Western mindset. That's his community. I do hear him talking about the Bantu people and trying to integrate what he knows about original culture. But this is, again, as he said, a stepping stone, like just a point of departure for all of us to then continue the authorship, continue to see what is involved here and really get a picture of what is needed and what are these unconscious programs that we're living out, because we're all products of society. So this is some of my understanding about why we're doing this. And so we can get some solutions, maybe create some solutions together that incorporate a more global understanding and a more global perspective. Maybe it might include what we're learning from, or what the Chinese have to say about things, and so on and so forth. Original cultures. Anyway, I think I've said that, what I wanted to say about that. But I appreciate the questions that you all bring, and curious to see, Sophie, if you have an idea about how to approach some of this. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I think a way of addressing the question of both how this chapter relates to fear of other groups, and the question of like, okay, what do we do? Is it might be good to dig deeper into this paragraph that both Lenore and Ken said that they really, really appreciated, and I think really encapsulates his overall thesis for the book, and then really like how this relates to this particular chapter, which is just the first paragraph of this chapter. And so maybe if we just like read that and dig deep into it, we can kind of explore how that answers some of the questions that are coming up. Does that sound good?
Sure.
Yeah. Ken, just to update you on what you missed, I suggested that as a way to address some of these questions that are coming up, we dig deeper into just the first paragraph that both you and Lenore said you really appreciated.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So I'm just going to read some of it, and then maybe we can like dissect some of the sentences. So he says, the shift from hierarchical to class societies occurred on two levels, the material and the subjective. And so the material is like the actual infrastructure and the material processes, the economic processes of power. And then there's also the subjective of just the ways that are, like he says, psychic structures, the way that we even view the world internally shifted in terms of these powers. So a clearly material shift was embodied by the emergence of the city, the state, the authoritarian techniques, and a highly organized market economy. And so like infrastructure. The subjective shifts found expression in the emergence of a repressive sensibility and a body of values, so very cultural, in various ways of mentalizing the entire realm of experience along the lines of command and obedience. And so, you know, I view personally the development of white supremacy and the development of what he said, he mentions patriarchy and egoistic morality as the internal mental structures of command and obedience. So white people feeling like they have a sense of moral superiority, that they are a superior race, and then that itself is an epistemology of rule. It then gives them the legitimacy to rule over other races and other religions. And so this is a cultural, internalized way of viewing the world. And so the reason why I look to this as an answer to Lenore's question of what do we do is, we can't do anything until we address the two levels that this manifests through. So both the material, in terms of like really looking at the market, the state, the city, and seeing how the actual wealth, like the land and the machines, are owned by only a specific class of people, and addressing that. But then also that's like not sufficient. We have to really address the ways that we've internalized those obedience and command ways of understanding the world, and the way that we view ourselves in relation to other things in that way. And so what to do about it is to really look within ourselves and see the ways that we're structuring the world in that way. So like looking at our relationships to plants, looking at our relationships to employers, people that we've given power to, and really looking at like what's the source of that power. I think later in the chapter he talks about that the source of power for the pastoral class, the priests, was this what he calls it, moral brokerage, or like being the broker between the divine and the earthly realms, whereas the warrior class was this brute force. And so those had different sources of power. And so looking within ourselves, with the way that we structure the world in a hierarchical way, like humans are higher than animals, like the wealthy are higher than the lower classes or the working classes, and really seeing like how it's not that they take power, but that we're giving them power by the way that we're structuring things. And so, I really like the distinction he makes in that first paragraph, and it ends with the sentence that Ken pointed out, that just as aggression flexes our bodies for flight or fight, so class societies organize our psychic structures for command or obedience. So just looking within ourselves is what I envision as like what to do.
Sophia, I have a question for you, because he also mentions in that paragraph and a little down, he says, we must rescue reason without becoming rationalistic, without using reason to mere technique. What does it mean? Because he tries to say, okay, reason and rationalistic. He says a repressive rationality, not to be confused with reason as such. I don't get it. I don't understand what is the difference between reason as such and rationality.
Yeah, so one way that we could interpret it is to look at this last sentence in that second paragraph, where he says, hence the emergence of class society was to be burdened from its outset by a paradox. How can reason, conceived as a tool or method for achieving ethical goals, be integrated with reason conceived as the inherent feature or meaning of these ethical goals? So when he connects it to a technique, which I didn't understand what that meant at first, and then later in the chapter when he talks about surplus values, he talks about technique, and I think he just means technology, increase in technology in general. And so when he's comparing it to a technique or a technology, I think it's that tool way of viewing it, where it's there's two ways to look at reason as a tool through which we like are able to engage with the world, and as a epistemology of rule in itself. And so like as a justification for humans having obedience over animals, for example, or humans having command over nature, because we hold reason in that way. So that's one way that we could interpret it. Another way, which because I went back and forth when I read it, is that I think that he wants to look at the way reason has created these paradoxes that are problematic, but he's also really committed to reason as a philosopher, and is not, I don't want to say biased, but it's like he doesn't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater kind of view.
I also, may I?
Yeah, of course, please.
I'm thinking about how, later on in the chapter, he goes into some depth in rationality as defined by Plato, Aristotle, and some other folks. And I'm interested in one clue that I had was this word mentality. Because I feel like there's part of what we're in the Western world is the hierarchy or command of rational thought or mentality, the cognitive process that I would suggest over mentalizes everything, like over analyzing. And he loves this, clearly he loves analyzing everything, and it has its place. But like from the standpoint of, which he talks about later in the chapter, like original societies don't do all this analysis. They don't go there. They don't have the same mental process that Western thought, Western not being a geographical, but a different kind of a category that we're talking about here in terms of a cultural assumption. So people are engaging not from the standpoint of guilt, not from the standpoint of should, but from a feeling sensibility. This is my observation from my contact with some different cultural groups that are considered more in the original, like Native American, even the Mexican culture as I know it, where things are happening in terms of how does this promote harmony for all, rather than from a standpoint of thinking things out endlessly. And does that make any sense to anybody? Does it resonate at all?
Yeah, I think so.
If I can add one thing that I just came up in the sentence that you brought up, the "we must rescue reason without becoming rationalistic," reminds me of a phrase I heard of, we must value or rescue science without succumbing to scientism. Which scientism is a word that's come up recently of people that treat science as a religion in itself, or like obsess as if this is really how
Dogma.
you get in the world. What was that?
Dogma,
exactly. They treat science as dogma, which is so ironic. But science is still a tool. Like it's still not just a tool, but it's a way of engaging with the world. So we can value science without succumbing to complete scientism.
That's a very nice way of putting it, Sophia. I now understand based on what Maxime and Sophia. Okay, thank you very much.
That was a great question.
Yep. And Lenore, did you have something you wanted to say?
Oh, I was just going to say that what you were saying about the overanalyzing, that explaining that concept, in terms of overanalyzing as opposed to what he is making this point. I just thought to myself, I think for me, he does that. It's like he's saying all of society does this, or society overanalyzes, or the scientists overanalyze. And I think maybe this is his problem. I really get this feeling that it's over analyzing something to, where the sentence that Mario mentioned, I too, and you brought it up, the same sentence, Sophia. I have a question mark by it, and it drove me crazy also. I read it 14 times. And even after hearing your concept and Mario's questions, I think is something totally incomprehensible about it. I really have to tell you. Hence, the emergence of class society was to be burdened from its outset by paradox. How can reason, conceived as a tool or method for achieving ethical goals, be integrated with reason conceived as the inherent feature or meaning of these ethical goals? I mean, it loses me. I cannot follow
No, I don't.
at all. I want to say, give me a break. Leave me alone. Go home.
Well, yeah. So this is precisely
and
like
overanalyzed, speak simply. What are you trying to say?
Well, I think it's kind of, I don't know if this is the right word, but it's coming through, like, it's an existential kind of question. We have the capacity for reason, and we can use it as a tool. And where does it become a way that we control and manipulate our world and ourselves to the point of losing our freedom? And I feel like that's what he's getting at. And yes, of course he's a part of it. We're all a part of it because it's part of how we operate. And yet he's questioning, can we make choice about how we think about and process our understanding of the world so that it doesn't keep putting other above or below us? Like in the desiderata, right? That's one of the things I love about the desiderata. It says, you can always, I'm paraphrasing, but don't compare yourself to others, because always there were going to be people who are further down on the path and people behind us on the path. And that just doesn't help anything. But somehow or other, we humans have this tendency in this Western way to keep structuring things in a vertical plane and making some people have more right than others to exist.
That's a great way of putting it. Yeah.
and furthermore, part of this, the thing that's like overwhelming the brain that everyone's dealing with here is a very human thing, okay, in terms of the ego. Because we have an ego, we need it for survival, and yet when the ego's in charge and our mind is going out of control, like where we're not engaging with choice around it, the ego becomes a tyrant within the human. Getting to look at that, somehow turn around and look at what's inside of us is really hard work. And it can like make you feel like your brain, your whole circuitry is going to explode because the ego wants to be primary. But I'll just say, if you stay with it, you hold the tension and keep breathing and exploring possibilities, we can find something else, like a deeper truth. And I think that's where our solutions are going to come from.
I would agree with you, except in one sense that I think an ego is kind of like a 2-year-old, and the 2-year-old may think that the 2-year-old wants to be in charge of everything, but in a deeper sense, the 2-year-old does not know what the 2-year-old needs, and actually feels much more comfortable when there's limits and boundaries, and it feels secure that the parent or the parent figures are in charge.
Mhm.
So good.
Great point. So that's
so-
why if we can identify that 2-year-old that's living inside of us, we can be the parent, and we can have it in its place.
Yeah. No, I agree with Ken, and I think the fact that we no longer live in communities, and the communities where there were different no hierarchies in ancient times, but people that would have more wisdom because they were older, or people that there was a way of containing the more impetuous members of the tribe. But yeah, that's, we have our modern society pushes us into living independently, individualistic, very individual. You are there for yourself, and you and your family are going to fight to make progress in life and have a house and a car and a horse or whatever you need. But that's our very, very individualistic way of seeing the world. And other parts of the world, they have a more communitarian, more, people are understood themselves as working together. It's part of their culture rather than having, so anyway.
Yeah, I think in that distinction is where the value of this book is too, because I hear and feel within myself all the time, like, oh, we used to live in community, we used to be really interdependent, and now we're super independent and competitive, and we're all like little atoms bumping against each other trying to make our way up the ladder. And I say that all the time as if they're contrasts, but they're a gradient that we went down over history. And there was a trajectory that took us from interdependence to independence. And what this book is trying to do is really analyze in a deep way, like, how each step was made, so that we don't make those mistakes again, and we can figure out how to get back to this way of being of interdependence with community.
Yeah. But you talk before, you talk about fear, no? And I think being just a little atom, as you said, independent, is very easy to manipulate into fear, because you are not, you are alone, you are afraid, everything can affect you. If you are a community, you feel totally different.
That's a great point. Yeah.
Very good.
I live in I call the asylum. I live in a community that is it's an apartment building for old people, and it's so beautiful because we all here have community activities, and we are all we are all older than 60, maybe older than 80. There's some people are 96, and so.
I want to know.
Yes, come and join us.
Yes, you have to.
For example, yesterday was St. Patrick. We had a big party for St. Patrick. And we were all dancing, and it's when you are a community, you have even in this modern society, you can create little communities, moments where you share life, and you feel you're not afraid of anything because you're dancing for St. Patrick. It doesn't matter if you are. I was dancing with a woman. Incredible. She is 81 years old, and you are not going to believe how good she was dancing. Another woman, I don't know how old is she. She was a former Las Vegas dancer, so she was really amazing. But this feeling of community, even in this modern world, it makes life so different. Rather,
where are you?
It's called in Roner Park. It's called Oak View Apartments, Oakview Apartments. It's a community. It's apartments for people. They say over 55, but they're mostly over 70.
In the Bay, is that?
It has Roner Park. Roner Park is in between Petaluma and Santa Rosa.
Oh, okay. I see. Cool.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful that you're there, and it's interesting the way in which we create pockets of community to be able to cope with this like horribly atomistic, individualistic society.
Yeah.
And so like a lot of my work that I'm hoping that I can understand through this book is like, how do we then create networks between all these pockets of community so that we're able to be stronger in those little pockets and survive, you know? Yeah,
communities within communities.
Yeah. Within a larger
love what you share, Mario, because the joy that you shared, you know, that you're expressing is like, you know, that pleasure principle. Maybe he talks about that a bit in this chapter too. And we have a split, you know, where it's like they're warring, you know, work versus pleasure. And so one of the questions that I see him asking, that I'm asking in this chapter is it possible to unite these two? And I think that it is, and I think that in traditional culture and in community, where we recognize our interdependence, there's nowhere else that this is more evident. I've had the experience myself, you know, at different times in my life, being part of a community where hard things can happen, but nothing quite so horrible as being alone in whatever life's challenges are, or even life's celebrations sometimes, you know?
Yeah, that's Maxime, my view, because one of the questions I always had trying to understand history and food and all those kind of things was why farmers were able to become the dominant form of life over hunter-gatherers, because farming requires discipline, requires hard work, as Sophia knows very well. So why in the world were farmers able to become the dominant form of life? And the only explanation that made sense that I found was because it was more fun being a farmer. Why? Because the villages were larger. They had more people. They were gathering to process the food. They developed some kinds of rituals or cultures, and it was more fun to be a farmer, although it was hard work, but it was much more fun. They had little houses where they would, if it was raining, they would go inside the house. If you were a hunter-gatherer, and it was, first you had to avoid the tigers, they're not eating you. The groups were much smaller. You were stuck with the same people, whether you like it or not. Yeah. So it was much more fun to be a farmer.
Now, I have a question about this. So I think that Bookchin would say that farming rose to prominence because it enabled surplus.
Yeah.
And my concern about this is that surplus led to hoarding. So there's kind of like this step-by-step trajectory. In hunter-gatherer societies, the group of hunters went out, the gatherers went out, they collected, and they brought it back and they shared it with the group. Now, in farming societies, this changed. And you see people like hoarding food for their people. And then other people being like philosophers, maybe, I don't know, not getting fed if they weren't participating in some meaningful way according to this new system of exchange that became the economy. So, thoughts?
Yeah, Maxime, I think that was a great point. That's what I had in mind too, is just like the enabling surplus value so that other things can emerge, and it's interesting how that was then a slippery slope into negative things emerging. My other thought was going on what you both said about the importance of joy and celebration and just like happiness. And in some ways, I think that's really another answer to the question of what do we do? Because like really joy is the only antidote to the kind of guilt and shame that legitimizes the power of the state and this kind of coercion. What was that?
You said it's the antithesis to the power of the state and I thought, and religion,
Yeah, exactly.
That hierarchy of religion and guilt that controls so much of society.
Exactly. And so like I think of kind of the only way to combat that really deep implicit guilt and shame that's built into this vertical plane of way of viewing things, as Maxime put it really well, is love and joy. Because when you have a deep love for the diversity of all things and how each thing brings a different aspect of reality to you, you're able to fight for those things more as a peer, as a respecting the subjective experience of the bear, So I like that you framed it in this way of like valuing your community specifically, because you had a dance party for St. Patrick's. And I find that a lot in my communities of just like, you work really hard but you also party really hard. You have a really great celebration with each other.
Yes.
Makes it all worthwhile, right?
Yeah. So that's my answer to what do you do?
How do you think we can create?
I'd like to go back to something Lenore said near the beginning of the conversation about the white nationalists and the terrorism that's affecting New Zealand and the whole world now. And in the last paragraph of the chapter, it says, Bookchin says something that I feel is pertinent to understanding this. And it's, I'm just going to read a sentence from the middle of the paragraph.
What page do you want?
Page 190, the last paragraph. He says, it is not nature that fosters an unruly psychic animality with its appetite for immediate gratification, but a hierarchical reality principle, an epistemology of rule, one that rests on domination and exploitation. The truly brutish mob that Freud fearfully associated with the ascendancy of aggressive instinct over sweet reason exists on the summit of civilization, not at its base.
I love that and highlighted that too. Yeah.
Very good. Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot to say about that. I mean, and to how do you fight against this vertical ideology that's manifested in this extreme violence, and the idea of the belief in that hierarchy to the degree that you believe that only if the white race is ascendant can only one little sliver of humanity or the world can survive or live or thrive, and the way to deal with that is to ruthlessly suppress everything else. Well, it's by small, gentle things like pointing out the things we have in common with everybody. Even the white nationalists, we have things in common and it's such a different way of facing and interacting with the world than with the hierarchical way. It's about coming out of the shadow values. Even power itself is a shadow value. Like you were saying earlier, Sophia, it's a substitute for love. Power itself is a substitute for love. It's an inadequate substitute. Power never satisfies the way love does. And love is a stronger power than power in a way. Anyway, that's my 2 cents about it. It's like approaching it like Maxine was saying, from a whole different way than the whole mental values that get us so stirred up.
What you just shared reminded me of this thought, which kind of relates to Lenore's original question of what do we do? And, earlier my response was, well, reflect on the ways that we hold these mental structures within ourselves, but then that doesn't quite get at how to address those mental structures within the white supremacists, right? Like if they're coming at things with a desire to command, then how do we, reflecting on ourselves, affect them in any way? Which kind of ties into this, the truly brutish mob that has this aggressive instinct to, at its base, to command. And I'm reminded of a book I just finished called The Fifth Sacred Thing. Oh. Have you read that? Yeah. And so in this book, there's kind of this dystopian reality and this utopian reality. In San Francisco, there's this utopia where it's a totally egalitarian society and no one goes hungry, no one goes thirsty. And then outside of that is this total dystopia where the corporations own all of the water, and it's like there's like still slavery, and there's just it's just really, really dark. And it comes to this point in the book where the armies of the South come to dominate San Francisco, this like last holdout of utopian society, and they're trying to take it over and in some way like command them, right? To like have a kind of like make them obedient to the ways of the South, to these dystopian hierarchical ways. And the utopian San Francisco community doesn't have an army because they decided to not put their resources in defense. They decided to put their resources into surviving. And so the way that they defend themselves is to tell each one of the soldiers, even now, there is a seat for you at our table if you will join us. And I think that way of engaging with someone as a peer, as coming at them with love, and even when they're trying to dominate you, saying, even now I consider you a peer, and even now there's a seat for you at my table to share food, is perhaps a way to use our own internal reflections on hierarchy and try and overcome them, and then encounter others with an invitation to have that mentality as well. So that's what it reminded me of.
That's beautiful.
Good.
I'm thinking about the how that invitation or that gift, if you will, brings us back to original culture and the original gifting society, which is if I have whatever I have, you go to Mexico. This was one of my first memories as a child. If I admired somebody's earrings, let's say, they would take them off their ears and give them to me. And I remember thinking, how could this be? Like, they're obviously something special to this person. And obviously I could buy something like this easier than they can, but they don't think about it that way because they're not going from a mental position of reasoning. Gee, that person could go buy them. I'll tell them what store to buy them at. But rather a sensibility that says, you like this? Here. That is a sensibility that believes that the world, the natural world, the universe, however, is friendly and that there's enough to go around.
And the natural.
When we start creating surpluses and hoarding things, or, okay, Bedouin society where where things don't grow easily, and it's a harsher, maybe things started that way, like he talks about, where there's a sense of scarcity that then creates aggressive deities and an aggressive social structure. Go ahead, Mario.
I forgot what I was going to say.
I think he said end in nature, but I don't remember what it was in relation to.
Oh, nature. I got distracted, sorry. That's the problem of being over 72.
Yes, and problem of being alive on the planet right now.
Distractions all over the place. Grabbers. It's like everything has a grabbing tentacles that pull you in.
Yeah.
Many interests, much history,
Yes.
much experience is what I
Yeah.
tie it up to.
Well, what do you think? You want to dig a little deeper in this chapter, or should we try and approach the next, start to approach what's coming? Yeah.
Okay.
Sure. Well, do maybe just because we have about 20 minutes before we do try to approach what's coming. Does anyone have any like lingering questions that they're still just really struggling with that you want to dig deep in for maybe 5 minutes?
Something.
If not, that's totally okay.
If no one's sharing anything, I'll share an exercise I did, because it seems like we were, as we examine ourselves for internalized hierarchy, as maybe once we might have examined ourselves for internalized oppression, internalized sexism, internalized racism, and all those internalized things. I started questioning whether is there somewhere in my belief system, in my psyche, in the world, where hierarchy is a reality and an appropriate reality that has just gotten bent and distorted out. So I want to open up that question to everybody. Is there somewhere where hierarchy is legitimate and not a tool of oppression and repression and so forth?
What a great
That's a really interesting question. Yeah.
Interesting. It strikes me as something that that some insight I think I've found to myself lately. And the word hierarchy, I guess it relates to a hierarchy. I suppose a manifestation can be of idealizing ideals or idealizing people to the extent where we place them on another level and experience an awe of them that can disable one from being on the same level and communicating on the same level and expressing himself at, on an equal level and being effective on an equal level. And if one can do that, one also can feel minimized or lessened by projections onto that. It becomes an unconscious kind of behavior. That's a way in which what you've just raised has just recently came to me in terms of a certain amount of going backwards, searching backwards in my life over that's coming up.
I love that you bring that up. It makes me think of Joseph Campbell.
Mm.
Talked about in his epic series with Bill Moyers about the images on the big screen. Now we have small screens, but the movie theaters and so on, that he was talking about Star Wars and how those characters like Darth Vader were the representative of the shadow, and all these different characters are archetypes, and when they're projected on that screen like that, they're like outside of us, and the gods and nature were closer to us, and ways that we could, and all archetypes are ways that we can take on and embody in certain ways. But I remember thinking when I first heard him talk about that, how those larger than life images on the screen have largely disempowered us, in the sense that rather than identifying with them and in embodying some of those qualities, we sit passively like an audience and simply watch the entertainment of it out there. Another teacher of mine talked about how with the Victrola and recording, that suddenly we went from a people where everybody sang, to just the professionals sing, the people who are good enough to record. And it really changed. Think about how much we all love to sing and dance, but we don't do it very much, because it's not really accepted, if I'm not a perfect singer, to sing in public. But how healing and joyful that is, and how enriching in our lives when we allow ourselves to do that. So that's I appreciate you bringing that up.
Beautiful.
So how many weeks do we have left?
I think we're
To the end of the world?
I think we have to do a full year end on the information.
I think there's 4 more in the class. I think we've had
Okay.
the 4th in this week, but
4 weeks.
Our last class may be April 6th. Yes, April 6th. So that's one.
I think that's only 3 weeks.
I think it's only 3.
okay.
Basically, we need to be reading 2 chapters a week from here on. And the next 2 chapters are, chapter 5 is the legacy of domination, and chapter 6 is justice, equal and exact. And they're about 57 pages in total. So I want to encourage everybody to have a piece of paper, if not a notebook, by them while they're reading. And I want you to come up with 2 to 3 key concepts that he's trying to convey, that you feel him expressing in each chapter. And of course, any other notes you want, like your responses to those, to the concepts, of course, too. We want to be able to talk about that. I have a couple of ideas. So one thing is there are 2 terms that he refers to, and I'm going to highlight them ahead of time so we can have an eye to, let's try and figure out what he's talking about with these 2 concepts. One is what he calls the ideology of equivalence.
Of what?
Ideology of what?
Ideology of equivalence.
Equivalence?
Equivalence.
Equivalent?
Yeah, equivalence. CE, the noun.
Oh, equivalent.
Yeah. And then ideology of equivalence. The other he started talking about already, and I could not find anything on it on the internet, called, he was referring to the Bedouin Compact. So I'm just going to throw that out there as something for us to, let's see who can find some information about that and what he's referring to so we can understand. And I want to offer you all an audiobook version of this for free, of this book, if you'd like to explore some other ways to read the book. I played around with it a bit this week and found it very helpful when you're taking a walk, when you're washing dishes, something that's you can do while you're thinking, cogitating at the same time. And I've sent you all the link. It's on the Facebook group, and it's also in an email that I sent you this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I found that it really helped me. The guy who reads it is British or has a British accent. He reads slowly and very clearly, and then I was able to like I had started reading and I started listening, and it helped me make connections by getting these two different ways, and then it also helped me move through the reading quicker. So,
I would suggest to skip things too.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like don't.
Yeah.
Like I would do kind of superficial reading and then go back to really look at certain pages that you really felt connected to or seemed like something was profound in there, and try to dig deeper in the paragraphs that speak to you, instead of trying to like really understand every sentence. Just get the gist of the entire chapter and then zoom in on certain areas. And then getting the gist of the entire chapter is usually like the first page and the last page is a good way to just like understand what the trajectory is, and then go deep.
Great idea.
Sophia, why don't you publish the book for dummies?
That takes a lot. Although Maxime's found something, I haven't seen it, but on the because Murray Bookchin started the Institute of Social Ecology, and there was a Cliff Notes kind of.
They have a Murray Bookchin reader that's also an audiobook. But I don't know that they're covering the ecology of freedom. I haven't.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Actually, you know what? Let's take a quick look here, because I have it up on my. Oh, look, he has usufruct, complementarity, and the irreducible minimum.
Mario speaking.
Sorry.
Hold on. Okay. So
yeah, those are some of the chapters too. The legacy of domination is a chapter.
Yeah. You can come to.
So yeah, so there may be some things if and here's Marxism and Introduction. So there's some things we could. This looks like a little zoom in that would help with certain concepts.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but also I don't want to overwhelm.
No, just as options, just to know that there's options. You're in freedom.
Ooh, our participatory evolution. This seems cool. You should, that's great. Cool. Well, so I think let's aim to get through those two chapters, but please skip.
And I think your idea of starting with the first page and the last page.
Boy, that's great.
Right?
How do you?
It's a strategy.
Yeah, you said skim and read superficially, but I find that if I try to read superficially, I don't understand anything. I'm just I want to go to sleep because I'm not getting anything.
Right.
So it's not so easy.
Yeah.
So the first and
So
last
in
page
my
make it a lot easier.
yeah, in my just brief skimming of the Legacy of Domination, the first of the two chapters, it seems like the first 5 pages or so are meh, but then, and this is just maybe my particular interest, but then he gets in the difference between governance and administration that I think is super interesting. And so maybe that for me, I'm going to skim those first 5 pages, but then get really deep in the difference between governance and administration. Because, in my work, it's like, well, you can have egalitarian networks, but someone needs to coordinate them. And then what's the difference of that coordinator from the state? So that's an open question for me. So kind of.
Mm-hmm. Basically, everybody, you can make this yours, whatever works for you. But these are just some ideas for how to approach it. And again, if you're hitting snags and you can go into that Facebook group, we can have some dialogue during the week and problem solve certain key areas together, work on it together.
Yeah, exactly.
Use the community.
Yeah. And I mean, a general good rule, which I always neglect to follow, but I always wish I did, is to, since it is 56 pages, do like 10 pages a day. So it's not overwhelming to do all at once,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just sort of want to throw out there as a protection for the future, and that I'm starting 2 new projects this week.
Okay.
2 classes that may be somewhat distracting and demanding. So
Okay, good to know.
I'm wondering. I've thought of dropping out, but I don't want to.
Please don't,
We'd
Lenore.
love to keep you here if possible.
If at all possible, please stay in.
Thank you so much. Thank you for all of you. I really enjoy you all so much.
Okay.
Well, likewise.
And Mario, I'm serious. Let me know where you live. I'm interested. I mean, I'm not ready to give up my home, but who knows?
Oh, he's muted.
I like to know about places that are community, that aren't just for old fogies. It sounds like yours isn't.
Yeah. I will, I don't know how to communicate with.
My email, if you want to send me, anything about it, is Lenore Loveman @yahoo.com.
Loveman.
Loveman, Loveman.
Okay, all one word?
Yes.
Okay, at yahoo.com. Okay, I'll send you the details.
Thank you.
You can. Where do you live right now?
New York City.
Oh, New York City. Oh.
Manhattan.
Okay.
Mario, if you go to the bottom of your Zoom frame, you'll see a chat bubble.
Yes.
And I wrote in her email address there for you.
Oh my God.
Look at that.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
The power of technology. The technique. Don't confuse these with reason.
Right.
And speaking of technology, the next couple of weeks I'm going to be home, so I'll be at my iMac instead of on the phone. So I won't be getting bumped off the conversation every few minutes by the capacity of the phone. So that'll be, for me, I think it's going to be better next couple of weeks.
Right.
Cool.
Great. Look forward to it.
All right. So, so do consider, if you're feeling super tight and constricted with the time frame with the chapters, just start with the beginning and the end pages, Mom, and then if you want to do more, you can do more. But if you give yourself a really reasonable goal, you'll feel successful.
Thank you. Good.
Okay, right. Have a good week, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Same for you.
Yes.
Bye.
Bye.